I can see laughter, or I can see tears. I see a choice, love or fear. What do you choose? I can see peace, or I can see war. I can see sunshine, or I can see a storm. What do you choose? No, I choose to love where freedom flies from my heart, where the light keeps shining. And I choose to feel the whole world crying for the strength that we can rise above. I choose love. I choose love.
Hello everyone. Welcome to Fear or Love. My name is Leah Lachapelle, and this is the program about creating the new paradigm. This is where we get to have the new conversation. And so here today to help me to do just that is my friend Jack Alice. And Jack is all the way down here from Oconomowoc and Lake Okauchee, Wisconsin. I got it right. You're far from home, Jack. And so Jack is here with us in Austin to masterfully cause an awakening. I am totally on board with that. And incidentally, last night, this is on a tape delay, but last night here in Austin at the Unitarian Church over on Grover, thank you, Unitarian Church, we got to hear Jack Alice give a marvelous presentation on the shift. And Jack has written this book, Infinity's Flower, A Tale of 2012 and the Great Shift of the Ages. Now, that sounds pretty epic to me, and I have a great appreciation for this subject. This is why I'm alive. This is my purpose for being here. This is why Richard Decker, the producer of Fear or Love, and I show up and come down here to public access television to do this program. And so I congratulate you, our viewers, for tuning in and being a part of this great energy. Thanks for turning off mainstream media. Thanks for tuning in to free speech. And that's the beauty of living here in Austin. We still value our freedom here, and we're doing everything we know to do to keep that free speech alive here on public access television, Channel Austin. So back to Jack. Jack,
this will be free speech today.
This is totally free. I promise you. You're going to get your time. You are actually a clinical psychologist. You have a master's degree in clinical psychology, but that is not what qualifies you to present what you present about the Great Awakening. You've been on this trail for 35 years. Experience it. At least. Diving in and being it and experiencing
I'm an old man. I am.
You're just the perfect age to be doing this. And so tell us about how you got started with this conversation and explain to us what I've been introducing here in regard to the Great Shift.
First of all, can I say something just about you? How did you get to have such a special name?
Leah Lachapelle.
I mean, Leah Lachapelle. I mean, you should be a movie star or an author. Can I just see by Leah Lachapelle?
I should be
I mean,
an author.
that would sell. That would sell. That would sell.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I enjoy that.
It's almost like you have three names. You know, Leah Lachapelle. The rest of us just have two. I don't know how that.
Well, you know, La Chapelle means, it's French, and it means the chapel. It's
I thought
a
it was
sanctuary.
the hat. I thought.
No, that's chapeau.
Oh, okay.
So La Chapelle means the chapel or a private place of prayer. It's a sanctuary. So
It makes it even better.
I really value
I
that.
thought it was
So
Leah. I
thank
thought it
you.
was Leah the hat, and now it's Leah the chapel.
No,
So.
that's right. It's a very spiritual name in significance for me. So thank you.
Absolutely.
For acknowledging that.
Absolutely. How did I get started? It's so interesting in terms of where I want to track it in terms of there are so many different starting points. You know where I really got started on my path, if you will? When I was a very little boy, let's say 4 years old. And I remember that the version of the world that I was being spoon-fed by my family and the church and by this crazy culture that we live in, somehow it just wasn't clicking with me, even as a little boy. And I remember as a little boy looking out the window at the birds and at the snowflakes and at the sun and the clouds, and just kind of going, wow, this place is really cool. And there's something about all this that they're just not telling me. And I really do think, too, that that's the essence of spirituality, of true spirituality, is us just making that connection with what's there, with nature, with natural forces, with the beauty of it all, with the splendor of it all. But at a very young age, I can remember lying in the grass looking at the clouds and just going, wow, this is all I need. And it all started there in terms of me having a spiritual connection that was mine.
So you just really felt the magic.
Nobody taught me
of being
this.
alive.
Nobody taught me this. It was just a sense, and I didn't have words for it at the time. It was just a sense I had that this was a marvelous place, and it also, I had a sense that there was something else going on. In my talk, I know you hear me talk about an unseen intelligence that's at work in the world, and people can call that God, or they can call it spirit, or they can call it whatever they want to call it. But I sensed that as a kid. I wasn't only sensing the aesthetic beauty of it. I was also sensing these unseen forces at work. And as a young kid, I got it. I really got it. And I think it all started there. As far as the shift is concerned, and can I also give the full title of my, not only of my book, but also of the talk I gave last night. The book is entitled Infinity's Flower, A Tale of 2012 and the Great Shift of the Ages. And my talk that I gave last night at the Unitarian Church was entitled 2012 and the Shift, Transforming Challenges into Blessings. And that's an exceedingly important part of this whole thing, is because a lot of people, when the subject of the shift comes up, and I'm sure we'll get into what that means here today, but a lot of people, when the topic of the shift comes up, it triggers a lot of fear in a lot of people because it sounds ominous. It sounds like doomsday. And there's a lot of people who are reinforcing that. A lot of people are saying this is doomsday. And that certainly is not the message that you and I are going to be putting out there, and it certainly is not the message that I embrace, or that's not the message that I'm being guided to give. This is, in fact, a marvelous opportunity that we have right now to create an entirely new world. And this is an opportunity that doesn't come along all the time. It comes along about every 26,000 years as the Earth makes its journey through the galaxy. We are at this once every 26,000 year point, once again, where we have this wonderful portal or opportunity or energetic opportunity to change things, to change from an old paradigm, which is coming down. We can all see that it's wobbling from an old paradigm to a completely new world, and the completely new world is one of higher consciousness, energy, and spirituality. So it's a very, very big shift. As far as the shift is concerned, specifically as far as the shift is concerned, I'd have to credit Greg Braden with really kicking me off on this one.
Isn't he
because
terrific?
When I was introduced to his stuff about, his material, it was entitled Zero Point, I think, were his original works on this, Zero Point in the Shift or something like that. Now, I didn't even think it was a book. I think it was a series of audio tapes that he had. And I took a look at his material. I interviewed him on a teleconference show that I had at that time. And that was the starting point for me in terms of And with just about everything that I've learned in my life, as soon as I hear something that really resonates, with my heart and with my spirit, I just go, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And as soon as I was introduced to Greg Braden's material, I went, yeah, that's it. There's something here. And it really resonates with how I feel about what's going on in the world. And now somebody comes along and kind of, gives it all shape and begins to fill in the gaps as far as, what I'm feeling subjectively, but don't have any way to, just don't have words for it yet because I don't have a frame of reference. Well, Greg Braden provided the initial frame of reference for me, and then from that point it was just, it took off like a rocket in terms of going into this area and looking at other people and other prophecies and other interpretations and knowledge about this area.
So what I hear you saying is that you didn't have some sort of a boundary around yourself that prohibited you from making these other investigations. Because a lot of times people go right up to the wall and they can't go there because it's wrong. And so you didn't have that.
I hope that I never have boundaries, and I would like to encourage everybody never, ever to have any boundaries about anything. And that just means being open to all the various possibilities. Because as soon as we enclose ourselves in a box, we're dead in terms of things become stagnant and we just get closed off to so many opportunities.
Or we get a bigger box.
Well,
Yeah.
right, and a box is a box. I don't care how big it
Right.
is. David Icke is so good on that topic in terms of, David Icke is so good on the topic of dogmas. And David Icke always said, all dogmas are bad, because a dogma is, a certain set of beliefs in which, one is encouraged to stay within that certain set of beliefs and not stray from those beliefs. So no dogmas, always open, no boundaries.
Excellent.
And
Now,
this isn't a boundary now either. I mean, it just continues to
Certainly.
expand.
So that's not to say that you lose all of your integrity just because you don't have boundaries. You still have things that work for you in your
That's the
life.
equivalent of acquiring my integrity. That is my integrity.
Exactly, yeah.
I would say losing my integrity having boundaries would be losing my integrity, because I would no
Right.
longer. What is
Did you
integrity?
hear that? Yeah.
Well, what is integrity? Integrity is just us knowing who we are and being trustworthy within that. Whenever I say somebody really has integrity, essentially what that means is I really trust that person knows who they are, knows where they're coming from, and there's a certain solidness about them. And so.
Yeah, that's what holds the universe together. So, yeah. And so, not dogma. Great. So you mentioned David Icke. Let's talk about him, because David Icke, I think, is the most fascinating speaker on the planet. And he's just amazing. So have you ever heard David speak in person?
Oh, yeah. Discovering David was another major, earlier than Greg Braden, discovering David was really a major turning point for me because, and let me just go through, because it's a wonderful story. This is a story regarding my own personal awakening. And this is all about awakening, essentially. And by awakening, what I mean by awakening, I mean awakening to the truth about how the world really works. And, but that's only part of the awakening process. Once we awaken to the truth about how the world really works, then we're going to learn on that basis. And by the by the real world, I mean the old paradigm, mainstream real world. But once we learn how the world really works, we learn some things that invariably we learn some things that we're a bit uncomfortable with, in terms of there are some things going on here that we don't like very much, in terms of some forces that are, again, attempting to squeeze us into these boxes where we are not capable of accessing our full multidimensional potential. So David was instrumental for me in that whole process, because I was coming from a career, a 15-year career of being a traditional psychotherapist, I never did anything traditional, but as soon as the doors were shut, I did my thing. But I had the coat and the tie, and I was with an office with a bunch of shrinks, and I had 25 clients a week who were all referred by the insurance plans. It was all the whole mainstream. I had 15 years of that, and then I said, God, there's got to be more than this. I mean, I've got a good life here, but there's got to be more than this. And it was at that point where I joined an organization that was an alternative educational organization. They had home study courses and then offshore seminars. And G. Edward Griffin was one of their main speakers. I don't know if you're aware of, you probably are aware of. G. Edward Griffin
Many
is...
people in our audience are
Yeah,
aware of
Austin is very privy to G. Edward Griffin's work.
Yes.
He's really becoming quite big too in terms of what he does. But for those of you who don't know, G. Edward Griffin is a gentleman who wrote a book entitled The Creature from Jekyll Island, which examines our system of money and credit and banking. And G. Edward Griffin, in my opinion, was the one who really blew the lid off of exposing the scam, if you will, of our system of money and credit and banking. And as I'm sitting there in Cancun in this freezing cold room listening to Ed Griffin give his talk, I'm thinking, right on. I mean, this just answers so many questions that have never made sense about money and all that kind of stuff. This is it. This works for me. But then instantly, and I mean instantly, the thought popped into my head, if he's correct in what he's saying, and I know he is because I can feel it, if the established powers are able, and the government are able to pull the wool over our eyes in this area of money and finance and credit and taxes and everything, if they're able to pull the wool over our eyes there, what's to prevent the powers that be from pulling the wool over our eyes in every other area of life as well? I mean, is it just here or is it in other places? Enter David. And David pretty much then, David's work is all about exposing this, conspiracy basically to squeeze us into this box that then this conspiracy basically is there in every area of life. It's there in healthcare, it's there in government, it's there, it's all over the place. It's everywhere. This is the matrix, folks. There's not areas of this that are excluded. And as I'm listening to David and reading David's work, it's just fireworks are going off in terms of questions I had had my whole life about why the world didn't make any sense and why things were so crazy and why people were so crazy and evil and all this horrible stuff. All of a sudden, all these questions are getting answered, one after another after another. And I know for a lot of people, reading David's work can be very scary because people are very uncomfortable with being exposed to things that they weren't aware of and being exposed to how they're being squeezed in the way that they are. For me, when I read David, though, I pretty much was past that. It was so, even though what he was exposing was ugly, I mean, it wasn't a pretty picture, it was so inspiring for me all of a sudden to have access to, or to know, if you will, the truth. It was just so inspiring. It was like, being high on a drug or something. And so that was the kind of the next thing that kind of pushed me along on my path. And I read 3 of David's books back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I really the connection really isn't there anymore with me and David. I think it kind of served its purpose, and now I'm kind of going along on my own path. Plus, sometimes I think David kind of gets stuck in the conspiracy stuff, and I'd like to see him, because it can be very fear-based, and it can be I'm very much of the opinion, as far as exposing this conspiracy is concerned, that once you understand how the game is played, you really don't need to stay engaged in it in terms of studying it and getting into all the various aspects of it, because it's all the same. It's all the same.
Well, it can be addictive and religious.
Absolutely, and it can be it's very fear-based. I mean, it can be very fear-based. So I've gotten to the point now where I'm pretty much disengaged from, I don't care about that stuff anymore, because I know how the game is played, and the game never changes, and it's happening every day.
I would like to just plug David Icke's book. One of his latest books is Infinite Love is the Only Truth, Everything Else is Illusion. Now that book is very much an evolved David Icke.
Okay.
So I highly recommend that book. It's all about love.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So anyway, where were we? David just started the process for me as far as kind of kicked me off on the path, and there have been so many influences along the way, and certainly G. Edward and David and my experiences as a 4-year-old are among them. I could go on and on as far as the various influences, but I don't think people want to hear about that.
And so what are you doing now? You've written this book, Infinity's Flower, and it's just a wonderful book. I've read it. It's a novel, and it is a fictional novel in that it has characters and a plot. However, it is based on very solid evidence and facts as to what is occurring on the earth energetically with us right now. And I'll tell you what, I have underlined this book just like it was nonfiction. Yeah, seriously.
Cool. Yeah, cool.
So, how did this book come to be?
I don't know if I have an answer for that one. This is my third novel, I always have books stirring around in me. And my next book is stirring around in me now.
It's just in you.
Yeah, it's too soon to start writing it, and it still is very hazy. But if you've read this, you know that it's ripe for a sequel.
Oh yeah.
That doesn't mean there's not an ending.
Oh,
There is an ending,
Uh-huh.
and the sequel to this one would all be about. Well, I don't want to say it because I don't want to give anything away. But it is very ripe for a sequel, and this thing was just bubbling around in me for a long time, and then. Okay, a good answer to your question just popped in. Have you ever read Drinvalo Melchizedek's little story that he wrote about the Kogi people?
No.
Marvelous, marvelous little story he wrote about the Kogi people, who are a primitive tribe from South America. Primitive tribe from South America who were completely unaffected by Western civilization. In other words, they were living in the jungle, and they had kept their roots, to the ancient wisdom, and they had kept their connection to the forces of nature and the spirit world and those sorts of things. So on one level, the Kogi people were very primitive, and yet on another, primitive in terms of taking care of sustaining themselves in the jungle, living and hunting and washing their clothes and doing all those basic living life kinds of things. But on another level, the Kogi people were highly, highly advanced spiritually. They were capable of light traveling and dream journeying and using their spirituality to do all kinds of amazing things. And I can't remember exactly how the story went, but the Kogi people visited Drinvalo. Because the Kogi people had a sense that there was something wrong in the world. They could feel that there was something going wrong out there. In other words, the spirit world was telling them, there's some bad stuff out here. There's some human beings that aren't being very respectful to nature, and there's some human beings that are doing some bad things to the planet. So they could feel that. So they essentially traveled outside of their village by virtue of their light traveling, and sought out people like Drinvalo and like myself, whose heart was in the right place, and who still had kept their connection to the ancient wisdom, their connection to the forces and to the spirit world, because they saw those people, Drinvalo, you, me, and our group, as the hope for rebuilding the planet, creating the new paradigm and getting it right. And there's a lot more to the story, but when I read Drinvalo's little Kogi story, that was the thing that really triggered it. And as you know from chapter 1, we have these types of people visiting my main characters on an Indian reservation in South Dakota, and basically taking them on a dream journey, on a light journey back to their village in South America, and basically giving them guidance in terms of where they need to go and what they need to do in order to make the new world happen. And when I read Drinvalo's story, it clicked. I went, that's great. I'm going to give him full credit. I'm not going to plagiarize his stuff. And I in my book, I call them the Togi people and not the Kogi people, and I give Drinvalo full acknowledgement in my introduction. But that really sparked the book. That really sparked chapter 1. And chapter 1 is like a novel in itself.
Well, this is what's so intriguing about Infinity's Flower, is that it opens up possibilities. I mean, that didn't happen to you just like that. However, what you've done is you've created the possibility for that to happen for all of us, for us to connect with those that maybe are on different planes of existence.
Absolutely. That's a very, very important aspect of it. Not only people like the Kogi people and the other ancient indigenous cultures that are still around, but also for us to make our connection with the divine spirit. That's the most important connection we can possibly make. On a slightly lower level, it's all the same thing, but on a slightly less highly evolved level, making our connection with the spirit world and with the world of nature forces and that sort of thing. And then we also have our connection with each other. in terms of those of us that are resonating with this vibration I'm describing, connecting with those of us who are on the same vibe, basically. And one of the wonderful things about the event last night at the Unitarian Church is, Leah, the energy in that room was something. And I'm not just I'm not just saying this to be gratuitous. If it sucked, I'd admit it. I'd say, it was a bad crowd and it wasn't that good a show. The energy in that room last night was absolutely unbelievable. And you and George Humphrey and the gang, Tyson, Eberly, and who am I leaving out? Vicky Karp. How can I leave out Vicky?
Yeah.
These folks here in Austin are doing a remarkable thing as far as their own particular networking. Let's plug your network a little bit. Leah has a meeting of kindred spirits and souls at her house every Monday night, an intention circle, or on Tuesday night. George Humphrey has one at his house on Monday night. And again, it's a circle of like-minded spirits getting together for the purpose of connecting and creating this vibe we're talking about. And I'm sure any of you in Austin who are listening right now who'd like to hook into Leah's network and George's network, all you need to do is contact them and say, hey, I want to come, and I'm sure that you'd come. I hope I'm not doing something I shouldn't be doing here.
I mean, I trust that the universe will bring people to us, as they awaken to the possibilities of being a part of something like this. And we create vibrationally. We're very serious about it. It doesn't mean that we don't have any fun, but we're serious about this mission.
Last night was a lot of fun, too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And we get together for food and conversation, and we enter into a place vibrationally where we experience oneness. And this is like a microcosm. Our little groups are like a microcosm of what's going on the planet. And we're all so diverse. We're not cookie cutters of each other. We're real different socioeconomically and appearance and everything. We're just totally different. And yet we're learning how to accept one another. So
may I just say a little bit more about that, Leah? Because
yes, please.
As far as your network is concerned, too, what you guys are doing here in Austin, in my opinion, I've been doing a lot of traveling lately, and I know a lot about these kinds of networks because part of my mission is connecting with these networks. That's what it's all about, and that's what I'm out to do, is not only create my own network, but to connect with whatever networks exist in whatever places they exist. Your network is truly unprecedented. I have rarely experienced a network with this much power as the one that exists here in Austin. And I've experienced other networks before, but it's always kind of like, oh yeah, okay, it was okay. It was all right, sure, yeah, okay. Yours is like, whoa! Yeah. the real deal.
It is. Thank
you guys are doing something really remarkable here.
Thank you. Our hearts are opening, and we are staying humble with that because we still have a ways to go. We're not there yet, but we're very passionate about what we're doing and creating the new paradigm, being a part of causing this shift to occur, and living into a future that we actually want. I'm going to just pause there and remind everyone that I have actually written a book entitled Unzipping Reality, 11 Steps to Create the World We Want. And so it's a tiny little book, and you can get it, you can get more information on my website, fearorlove.com. Anyway, it's a prescriptive book. It's not, doesn't lock you into anything. It lets you be you. No dogma whatsoever.
No boundaries?
No boundaries. And so it's just all about your own aliveness. And that's really the key. So remember, Unzipping Reality. And I also had you on my radio show by the same name, Unzipping Reality. It's an internet radio show on co-creatornetwork.com. And that was a super interview.
Was it?
I loved it. Yes, because we mentioned Vicky Karp. Our friend Vicky Karp, that is so involved here in Vote Rescue, is who actually bought several of Infinity's flowers from Jack Alice and just gave them away. And so that's a real big distinction here in Austin, is that a lot of us have read this book.
And she gave one to George, and then George bought a bunch,
Yep.
and he's distributing them even further. So
Yeah, I'm lucky to have my copy because I keep lending it out, and I have to
Well,
have
I'll
this
give you
for
another
the,
copy.
for the TV show.
I'll give you another copy.
Thanks.
One you can lend and one you can keep.
Well, tell us a little bit, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for your words, what you just said about our group here, because we really are building this, and we're getting past all of our stupid stuff, you know, like I don't like him, or, you know, she doesn't do it right, or all of that, and we're coming together, and we're learning how to be at one-ment on the planet. So it is very exciting. Tell us about the characters in this book. What is it that sets them apart from the people in the Matrix?
Can I just talk about my characters without comparing them to the ones in the Matrix?
Sure.
That's a little bit more,
Yeah.
more than I can handle.
Sure.
A little bit more than I can handle there.
Yeah.
I was a strong proponent of Ayn Rand's work about 15 years ago, and which is so ironic because now I fundamentally disagree with the basis of her philosophy.
Yes, me too.
But it was such a wonderful, as far as what Ayn Rand does, as far as her focus on her area, and her area was the rational mind. Nobody, I don't care, Aristotle, anybody. Has ever treated the rational mind as beautifully and as cogently as Ayn Rand did in terms of understanding that aspect of human beings. Unfortunately, she didn't cover anything else. And she strongly was, she didn't like spirituality one bit. She basically just said, you know, if you can't prove it scientifically, it doesn't exist, and spirituality was hogwash. So at that point, we parted ways. I wonder what she'd be doing if she was around today. What do you think?
She'd be watching Fear or Love here in Austin, listening to this conversation and going, I got it. It's so obvious.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I learned from Ayn Rand, though, about, and we get into the whole topic now about fiction, because Ayn Rand wrote probably some of the most message-driven fiction that's ever been written. Atlas Shrugged was just, talk about a message-driven book, man. Atlas Shrugged was just a masterpiece as far as message-driven fiction is concerned. And Ayn Rand was a great believer in the concept of what she called heroism. And what she meant by heroism was her characters represented, allegorically represented principles, concepts, things like that. And I like that. She always said that the purpose of a hero in any novel is to teach a message and to concretize that message so that the message is embodied in a character. And she said that's the best way you can learn about any message is to embody it in a character, because when people see a character who embodies a message, they really get it, because they can see it being lived. It's not just words on a page, they can see it being lived. And Ayn Rand would always say, she'd say, whenever people ask me things like, well, explain to me your metaphysics, or something like that, she'd say, well, it was just like John Galt in Atlas Shrugged. And people would go, oh, okay, I get it.
Oh, yeah.
And my heroes, David Rhodes and Kelly Archer, who are soulmates, they're a partnership, very much represent that. I wrote they were designed to be heroic. In other words, they were designed to allegorically represent what we as human beings should all strive for. David Rhodes is basically who I am aspiring to be. He's me in more highly evolved, more perfect form. And I know that I'm already there, and I understand all that. And Kelly was too. Kelly was there to again to exude this message. So that's what my characters are all about. And I hope that works as far as attempting to convey that message through them in a way that is, concretized and personal as opposed to just abstract.
Right. So they're very tuned in people, very vibrationally sensitive people.
Absolutely.
That's what I got.
Absolutely.
From them.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And very open to David and Kelly are both, shall we say, very highly evolved spiritually.
Yes.
And David is actually so highly. The reason that David got to be the way that he was David's mother, who was from Infinity's Children. You'll have to read that one next.
Okay.
Infinity's Flower is a sequel to Infinity's Children. They can be read separately. But I attempted to make the point very thoroughly in Infinity's Children. And there's a very, very important lesson to be learned here in what I'm about to say. And it has to do with how we as human beings can be the best we can possibly be. and how we can avoid falling into some of the traps that are out there, being spun for us to, some of the webs that are out there for us to get stuck in. David Rhodes was the way he was because his mother, who was murdered in book number 1 because she knew too much, his mother was a remarkable psychic who was completely in touch with the divine spirit and who was completely in the flow of nature herself. Women who are that way know exactly how to born and rear healthy, vibrant children who are also in the flow, because that whole process of childbirth and mothering, bonding, is all part of this natural process. And so David got to be the way he was as a result of having this extraordinary mother who just raised him in such a way that he was allowed to kind of flow into it. Remember the little story I told about the Baka people and the Pygmy tribe in South Africa? I don't know if I did that on Tyson's show, or I don't know, you and I have done so many things together lately.
Yes.
The Baka tribe are a primitive tribe similar to the Kogi in South Africa, the Pygmy tribe. Again, who have not been contaminated by civilization and who have kept their connection with the divine forces and the forces in nature. And I discovered them because there's music CDs that are done where their life is virtually all music. They sing and chant and play music more than they talk. Maybe 75% of the time is singing and chanting and those kinds of things, and 25% is verbiage. So they have a very high vibrational lifestyle. They're just singing, and their whole life is like la. They're like dolphins. They're like dolphins.
Yeah.
It's all music. And when you hear the children, and they're all together on this. There is no, the kids are over there in their room and the adults are over here in their room. No, they're all together all the time. And you can hear the children just vibrationally, just flowing with this music of life. It's just like the children are all kind of in the background going, la, 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 la. And you think, what a wonderful way, to raise a child, and what a wonderful way for this child to be connected to the flow without any effort whatsoever. Because when we get this right, it is completely natural. There isn't any thinking, there isn't any, women, for example, who keep this connection, there isn't any question about, how do I have this baby, and I've got to go talk to the doctor to find out, and I've got to go to the hospital, and I've got to have all these tests. No, it's just like stay in the flow, and it's all very natural. Well, that's how David Rhodes, my character, got to be so exceptional. And previously in my life, I was very, very into that whole birthing process and how important it is, and how important it is for people to recognize the importance of birthing and rearing children properly and bonding with them properly. And so that's part of the message. And few things in life are more important than that. It's not hard.
Exactly.
And we don't have to do.
It's natural.
We don't have to do anything. Just be.
Just be. Just align ourselves with spirit.
Yeah, oftentimes,
spirit.
So often you hear parents say, well, what do I do with my kids? Even somebody last night at the conference said, well, I'm really interested in this whole concept of the indigo children and what we can do to connect with the indigo children to make sure that the indigo children get the message. And we don't have to do anything with the indigo children.
We make it too hard.
Really, just all we have to do as far as what we need to do with children is we just need to take care of ourselves. When we as parents have our own act together, have our own spirituality together, have our own lives together, and we're living lives joyfully, peacefully, we don't need to do anything with our kids because our children absorb their parents. They just suck them in. And your children will be what you are. So you don't have to do anything. Just be happy. What's the best thing I can do for my kid? Be happy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it happens automatically. And the more you try to do, the more you're going to screw them up. George Carlin had this wonderful line where he did a whole bit on this once. It was so beautiful. It was before he got a little bit too angry. He was still funny. He was right on the edge as far as his anger was concerned. But he said, parents, all you need to do is leave your children the F alone.
That's right. That's right.
He said, when we were kids, we used to live in the Hudson River in raw sewage, and it was great.
Yeah, and they lived.
And we didn't know.
Yeah. It's that knowing. It's that left side of the brain that can hang us up. And last night, I took 3 pages of notes. And you said in your talk the biggest mistake scientists make is to have a world they can measure.
That's where one of the places where humanity really took a wrong turn.
It reduces everything to something measurable. It doesn't make room for any of the mystery.
Right, anytime you get to a point where you're doing an experiment with a hypothesis, if you get to the point where you say, well, we can't measure this right now because of all these variables, let's throw them out. What the scientists threw out is more valuable than what they retained. Because basically what they did is they threw out spirituality. Spirituality just made everything way too unmeasurable. Way too unmeasurable. They threw out consciousness, just goofs everything up, and they created a world that was very, very hard and very measurable, but what a tiny and meaningless world.
Exactly. Well, something that we're really sensitive to these days is something you describe in your book, the frequency fence. Can you address that? What is the frequency fence, and can we just tear that thing down?
At the risk of giving away too important a part of the plot of my book, I don't know about, let me tell you at least hypothetically what the frequency fence can possibly be. And I don't necessarily even, in writing a book that's futuristic, you have to take a lot of leaps in terms of what you're doing. I think David Icke was the first one who introduced me to the concept of the frequency fence, but I bumped into it a whole lot of times since then. And basically what the frequency fence is all about is it is a vibrational fence that has been, or a vibrational field basically, that has been placed around the planet Earth by very sophisticated technology, which cuts off a lot of the vibrational energy coming in that can be received by people. And it's done by satellites and all this kind of stuff. Now, I don't know if a frequency fence actually exists. I think it's a possibility, because when you look at the lengths to which the powers that be go to make sure that human beings are, retained or kept in this box that they try to squeeze us in, they go to tremendous lengths to keep us in that box.
They do
because
that.
they're scared to death of us, Leah.
Yeah.
Because if we reconnect with the true source of our power and spirituality, they're history.
Yeah.
And we will just take back this planet and we'll turn it back into the paradise that it was designed to be.
Their control is history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So they're very highly invested in keeping us in that box in any way that they can. A frequency or a vibrational fence is certainly one very, very real possibility. So for the sake of my story, I threw it in there. I don't know if it exists or not. It's a possibility. If it doesn't exist, there are innumerable other ways of doing the same thing, and I could have come up with other things I could have thrown in the story just as well.
Well, in any event, it's invisible to us.
Right.
It's not something we see with our naked eye.
Well, let me just say one other thing about the frequency fence that's so interesting in today's world, because one of the explanations I've heard for chemtrails, which we really don't know what they are,
So glad you're bringing that up.
could have been similar to this frequency fence idea, because all the various possibilities for chemtrails are weather control, mind control. There's a bunch of different possibilities for what the frequency fence can be. One of them is that in an effort to create an atmosphere, energetically, an atmosphere in which they can, again, the powers that be, can work some of their vibrational technology in kind of a mind control way, is being accomplished through the use of chemtrails. What it's doing is it's basically creating like an atmospheric soup that can be used for the purpose of transmitting the kinds of signals that they need to transmit to do some of the dastardly deeds that they're, and a lot of which could be related to mind control and some other sorts of things. And when I see the vastness of the chemtrails now and the incredible hugeness of it in terms of what they're doing, I think there's an element of it is weather control. There's a good chance that I doubt it has anything to do with an attempt to control global warming. that one just doesn't resonate with me. But this whole somehow creating this atmospheric electronic soup for which they're using for some purpose. One of the weird things about chemtrails is because it's such a top secret, nobody knows really what's going on. There's all kinds of theories. Something's going on. We know that those aren't the natural exhaust fumes from airplanes. We know that.
We know that, but I really have to bring some appreciation to chemtrails, because chemtrails have alerted us to look up, to make observations about our world and what's going on. And so I do appreciate that. And in your book, Infinity's Flower, you talk about some sort of lines, energy, field lines in the sky. And I'd like for you to expound on that a little bit. Is that just really, really pretend, or is this
that's a heck of a lot less pretend than the frequency fence is, and it's a heck of a lot less pretend than a lot of things are. I got that concept, the concept of the energy lines, from Don Juan. And for those people who don't know, one of the most important influences on my work is the works of Carlos Castaneda regarding the Indian sorcerer and man of knowledge, Don Juan. And a very, very important part of Don Juan's metaphysics was that everything is energy. So he's agreeing in many ways with those of us in the spirituality field. His world was a world of energy, and when he and the other sorcerers of his lineage, they had the capability of seeing the world of energy. Part of their discipline was training themselves to see this world of energy directly as it moved in the universe. In other words, that's what they were training. That's what sorcery was all about, was not only seeing this world of energy, but then learning how to act in this world of energy. In other words, they're acting in the fifth dimension and not the third dimension. This is where their tremendous acts of that defy linear third dimensional cause and effect rules comes from. The ability to fly, the ability to move through matter, the ability to dream journey, those sorts of things. This is where magic comes from, the ability to act and to operate in this world of energy. And when Don Juan and the sorcerers of his lineage saw into this world of energy, they saw human beings as luminous-shaped eggs, with other features too, but basically with luminous-shaped eggs, and they saw the rest of the world as a lattice of fibers, like a spider web of luminous fibers. Human beings had luminous fibers basically coming into their umbilical region, which is one of the connecting points to the world of energy. They also had an assemblage point behind them, a tennis ball-shaped ball of light behind them, through which other of the fibers came in, which was where human beings, perception, ability to perceive the world, what was gathered. So this lattice of energy fibers is basically, that's the quantum world. That's the real world.
Yes.
And what happens in Infinity's Flower, I don't want to give everything away here, but what happens in Infinity's Flower is when the veil begins to come down and when the dimensions begin to overlap, the characters in my book, not only my two characters, David and Kelly, but a group that they had formed with in Oakland, had the ability under these circumstances to be able to see these energy lines directly in the sky. And as they ascended or evolved into this ascension process, more and more of them were able to see the lines. And one of the things that was happening was things are changing very rapidly, and my hero David could see that more and more and more of the group were actually able to perceive the lines. And the characters were saying, "Can you see the lines?" And a lot of them were saying, "I can see the lines." And others were going, "No, I can't." So that was part of what was happening when dimensions started overlapping and when the frequency fence came down and when this other dimension began to overlap with our third dimension.
What can we do to start perceiving?
This is heavy stuff.
I just love this. I'm just diving in here. What can we do to begin to lighten our perceptions? How can we perceive? How can we see? Like you're saying, they could see these lines of energy. Is there something that we can do on a practical level to begin to practice this? Because I want to grow. I want to be able to perceive things I've never perceived before.
No, there isn't.
Nothing?
I'm kidding.
Come on.
You knew I was messing with you there, didn't you?
Yeah.
This, too, is another area where it's necessary for us to keep things as simple as possible, because a lot of people make this way too complicated and way too confusing, and there's an awful lot of, DNA reactivation, all kinds of stuff going on in the New Age community nowadays.
Right.
And I would just suggest to anybody in the audience, anytime you go to one of those workshops or anything and they make it too complicated, go to a different workshop. because this is stuff that we really need to keep as simple as we possibly can. And it all boils down to one thing, Leah, and this is going to sound really preposterously simple, but ultimately it is preposterously simple. In order for us to access this world, in order for us to be vibrationally, to be able to connect with these dimensions we're talking about, the first thing that we need to do is we need to relax. Plain and simple. Meditation is a wonderful way of doing that, but we simply need to relax our bodies. Breathing is the best way to do that, is the best way to relax the muscles of our body, the entire physiology of us, and it pulls us right into the moment. And the other technique that I like to talk about is the whole technique of quieting the mind, eliminating what I call the internal dialogue, which is another phrase from Castaneda. Internal dialogue is the tapes that run. We all know what they are because we were all conditioned and brainwashed in the same crazy culture. So we've all got our tapes running. And it's a question of being able to identify those tapes, see them, understand them. And once you can identify them and see them and understand them, you then have the capability of not necessarily stopping them, but disengaging from them. In other words, the tapes might continue to run, but it's kind of like running over in the corner there, and it doesn't have any power because you're not really paying any attention to it anymore.
Exactly.
It's kind of just disappearing. Now that doesn't mean that they don't, rear up every once in a while and go, look at me, look at me, look at me, because they do. But then it's just a question of us noticing them, breathing, creating that place of silence in our minds, and then it's so wonderful. Your fear or love is basically, is it fear or love or fear or joy? Fear or love.
Fear or love.
Is it love or is it in that order?
Fear or love.
Okay. Because it is ultimately a choice, and it is a choice ultimately that is a very simple choice. And a lot of people struggle with that, and it can't be that easy, it can't be that easy. Well, ultimately it is. I'm sorry, it is. I know it took me 35 years to get it, but when I finally did, I went, you mean it was a choice all along? Yeah. Well, why didn't I choose sooner? Well, the reason I didn't choose sooner was that I still had too much of an investment in all that garbage. I was invested in it. I needed it. It was my comfort zone. It was who I am. And I wasn't aware of that at the time, or I was aware of that at the time, but it just wasn't possible for me to disengage. But that's what it's all about. In terms of getting access to this world, to these dimensions we're talking about, it all begins with relaxation. It begins with quieting the mind, relaxing the body. And for those people who say, oh, but you can't meditate all day, you wouldn't get anything done. Hogwash. Hogwash. I have learned in my own experience, and perhaps some of you have heard me say this, I am the master turtle. I move so slowly through life but that's the way things work for me. And I'm endeavoring to meditate all the time. And since I started living this way, I've also noticed that I get a lot more done, more efficiently, more effectively, and that's where it's at.
Would you lead us in one of your practices?
Sure. Let me just do a...
We probably have 1 minute.
Oh, I don't think I can do it in a minute. It's just too short.
A mini version?
Is that a minute?
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know about you, but that really, it just helps me to be centered. Helps me to love myself. Just to pay attention and to draw myself into integrating with all that is. I came across something.
That's quite a book there, Leah.
In the Bible.
Oh, that's a Bible.
Yeah, it's in the Bible, and it's Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. It says, "Listen, my beloved, behold, he is coming, climbing on the mountains, leaping on the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, he is standing behind our wall. He is looking through the windows. He is peering through the lattice. Peering through the lattice. This is us wanting to come in to our own selves, our own realization of who we actually are in the oneness of all that is. Go ahead and peer through the lattice, however you perceive that in your life. Peer through and don't put up walls. And get a copy of Infinity's Flower. How can people find out more about this? What is your website?
www.infinitiesflower.com, no apostrophe in infinities, infinitiesflower.com. You can buy the book there, and anything else you want to know about anything having to do with this message or Jack Alice, you can find there.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jack Alice, for being here, for coming all the way from Wisconsin.
My sister, my new
Be
sister.
with us, and this is such a fantastic place to live. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Richard Decker and Channel Austin. And I'm Leah Lachapelle, and this has just been more fun than I can even describe. So thank you for joining us here on Fear or Love. Bye-bye.